Hello. In this talk, we're going to go through how to use the website happydna.org to reconstruct DNA from a parent. We'll also talk about the accuracy of that approach before the demonstration. As always, the views in this talk are those of myself and do not necessarily represent Family Search International or RootsTech. So to begin, just a little bit of background. Now this background is gone into in more detail in a separate RootsTech Connect talk called An Introduction to Ancestor DNA Reconstruction, Why, How, and Tools. So as we went over there, children inherit a mosaic of their parents' 2 chromosomes. Each child inherits half of their mother's DNA and half of their father's DNA, one segment at every single position. And the DNA in each child inherit is a random half of their parents' DNA. Now, as in the previous talk, there are plots of families where squares represent males, circles represent females, and the vertical bars below them are pictorial representations of the person's 2 chromosomes. Now, the way this reconstruction works, the details are beyond our scope today, but in effect, we can subtract away the DNA that, in this case, the father transmitted to these children and join together segments with a common color. Again, the details here are not important for our purposes, in order to reconstruct the DNA of this mother. Now, the demonstration for how to use the website will come at the end of this talk. Now, let's talk about an example of DNA that was reconstructed, in this case, the DNA of my grandmother Claire. So it turns out that the numbers associated with chromosomes roughly indicate their size. Chromosome 1 is on the longer side, chromosome 22 is on the shorter side. And so I'm going to show plots like this that represent the amount of DNA that was reconstructed for my grandmother. And don't think that the white space here is important. All we're concerned with are the colored red or pink bars. So chromosome 22 here is again quite short, and chromosome 1 is very long. So this is a pictorial representation of the DNA that was reconstructed by Happy for my grandmother Claire. What is shown here are pink regions where, even though my grandmother has 2 chromosomes, the data from her 4 children only allowed us to reconstruct 1 chromosome copy, and in the red regions, all of her DNA from both copies was transmitted, and so Happy was able to reconstruct both copies. So if you look at this, most regions are red, there's some pink. About 90% of my grandmother's DNA was reconstructed on both copies, and almost 10% on 1 copy. If we give ourselves half credit for the 1 copy, then we were able to reconstruct about 94% of her DNA. Now this is an example of why it is that at some locations we only reconstructed 1 chromosome copy. Here we have the transmissions of a female's DNA to her 4 children. And as you can see, there's a region where only her pink chromosome got transmitted. And there's some probability of this occurring. In large families, usually most of the DNA will have gotten transmitted. By large, I mean something on the order of 12 children. That's not how big my grandmother's family was, but if you're so blessed as to have such a large family, you can anticipate that you would be able to reconstruct nearly all of your parents' DNA. So on average, we can do the math. Again, the details here aren't so important, but the fraction of DNA is a function of the number of children that we have data for. And for 4 children, there's about almost 94% on average amount of DNA that should get reconstructed. Now, unfortunately, we don't have DNA from my grandmother, so it's impossible to say how reliable the reconstruction was. But through collaboration with a team of researchers from San Antonio, we do have data from 114 nuclear families from the San Antonio Mexican American Family Studies. And these families range in size from 3 to 12 children, with an average of 4.6 children. So we ran Happy on these families and then compared the reconstructed parent to the original data. So we have in these 114 families, we have both the father and the mother, and we separately excluded either the father or the mother and then did the comparison. So the first thing we'll look at is how much DNA did we recover? So here's a plot that shows the amount of DNA that was reconstructed across all 114 families. And it ranges from about 80% up to effectively 100%. Now that's useful, but it's not so informative for families with different sizes because there's such a big range. So if we zoom in and only plot the families with 3 children and those with 8 or more children, we see that this range, this lower end of this left-hand plot, is near the 80%. So if you only have 3 children, you can anticipate getting about 80% to 90 or 92% of the DNA reconstructed for the parent. And if you have 8 or more children, you can get 98.8 or even up to roughly 100% of the parent's DNA reconstructed. So that's pretty nice. So to look at the accuracy, we took the 114 million variants that were reconstructed across these 228 parents, and we compared those reconstructed variants to the original data. Out of those 114 million, only roughly 36,000 were different. This suggests that the reconstruction was over 99% accurate. Now I want to caution you that in these data, we were able to do quality control filtering that won't be possible with raw DNA that you download from companies' websites. So I can't promise that you'll be able to get accuracies this high, but Happy does have quality checks in it that should enable it to do quite well. All right, I'll now demonstrate how to use Happy to reconstruct, in this case, my grandmother's genome. I've loaded the website. It's happy-dna.org/happy. This will be linked from the tools menu on the website. Right now it's not linked because it's not yet publicly available, but it will be by the time the conference starts. And so here we are on this site. Note that it gives a warning that you are using this data at your own risk, and that genetic testing companies may choose to disallow uploads of these data. So just be aware, we can't control the decisions of those companies, but hopefully this tool will be useful for you. So the first step in running Happy is to input DNA raw data from a parent. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, in fact, although it might look like data is getting transmitted to the Happy DNA website, in fact, using software WebAssembly techniques, the code, the Happy code, is actually running on your computer, and no data gets transmitted, no raw data gets transmitted to our servers. So you can rest assured that using this software should not, unless there's some security vulnerability in your web browser, should not expose your data to other people. It's all run on your computer. So first step, we'll go ahead and get my grandfather's raw data. And so we'll load that, and it takes just a second or two to read in the data. And again, this is all stored on this computer. And now we will go ahead and input the children. So I'll go ahead and input my dad first. So there, he's now read, and I'll input my uncle. And now we've got 2 children read, and this choose files, you can actually choose multiple files. So I'm going to go ahead and input the 2 aunts at the same time. So open those, takes a second to read those, and then once this page has read in parent and at least 3 children. Now it's read in 4. This step 3 button appears. So to ensure that the quality of the data is reasonably high, Happy currently requires data from at least 3 children in order to run. And so we'll go ahead now that we've uploaded all the children. It's better, as I've mentioned before, it's better to have more children. This family had 4 children, so we've input all of them, and so we can go ahead and run Happy. So this process takes a little while. The website, hopefully in a few weeks, will be able to provide more feedback as to which chromosome it's currently analyzing. Right now, it doesn't give any feedback, but it is working. So there, it's finished. Didn't take all that long. And so the very last step is to actually produce raw data for that parent. So you can choose a file name. So I'm going to call it grandma. And then you click print reconstructed parent. And what it will do is it will take a moment. Now, if you can see here in this bottom left corner, this file, it looks like a download. It's actually, again, everything is being done on this computer, and it will be done on your computer when you use it. It's printing, and it just, the software has a bit of overhead, so it takes a bit of time, and it's a fair amount of data, and so it is printing. The status says that this was successful, and in just a moment here, this will complete, and we will have the raw data for my grandmother. So I guess I'll stop short of showing you that. It's the file format may change slightly between now and a couple weeks from now when you're using it, but that's how it is. I encourage you, if you find this website useful, to go ahead and join our mailing list. It's a very low traffic mailing list, and you'll be able to get updates if there's any changes that are ever made to Happy. It might get improved, or other features that are added to this site. We will send that to the mailing list. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to put a plug in. Probably most of you are very excited and try to get DNA from everyone that you're related to. If so, you know how powerful it can be. But just by way of inspiration, my grandfather was alive when consumer genetic testing companies became available, and so was his brother. And so there is the hope, although Happy doesn't work in this context, there's the hope of using DNA from these 2 siblings, my grandfather and my great uncle, to reconstruct DNA from my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather died in the 1950s, so it's really exciting to think about the possibilities here. With that, I want to thank Ying Chow, who's a student that's doing research on Happy and other topics, and also John Blangero and the other group of researchers that collected the San Antonio Mexican American Family Studies data, also those that have provided funding to this research. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this useful.